You're listening to the podcast for all of the news, notes, and breakdowns for your Ohio State Buckeyes. This is Sons of the Shoe with Nick Wilson and Spencer German.
We are back. We are back. The Sons of the Shoe is back. Hi, Spencer German. How you doing, buddy?
Muted myself. Pretty good, Nick. How about you?
Doing all right here. Crazy week in college football. The early signing period opens on Wednesday, December 20th. That would be tomorrow as we record here on a Tuesday. It closes on Friday. We are at smack dab in the middle of bowl season. There is a flurry of Buckeye news, none of it seemingly positive to this point. So we got all that going on. We got Chip Kelly fixing college football, but as everybody knows, we are a new podcast. We would appreciate you following the show wherever you get your podcast. Apple, Spotify, the free Odyssey app, 923thefan.com. Of course, you can also watch us on the 923thefan YouTube channel. But why would you do that? I am fat. I am ugly. Do not do that to yourself. But I guess we can start at the beginning. With transfer portal news, Julian Fleming officially going to Penn State, Kyle McCord officially going to Syracuse. Those were the two big dominoes that Ohio State fans were waiting to see where guys that dropped into the portal for Ohio State went. Let's start with Julian Fleming. Is this a big blow for Ohio State, him going to a division rival, a conference rival?
First of all, for him, I think it makes a lot of sense. He is from Pennsylvania, and I know he was recruited by Penn State coming out of high school. So I think that move kind of makes sense for him. But yeah, I wonder about does he know trade secrets thing? But I mean, listen,
real quick. Penn State already knows how to lose to Michigan, so they don't. There's no here. You really want to piss your fans off. This is how you do it.
Well, it's more so does he have the secret recipe for James Franklin to finally get one over on Ohio State? Is more so what I think I'm referring to. I don't know if that's the solution. We spent an entire episode after the win over Penn State talking about how James Franklin's always just going to James Franklin. I don't think Julian Fleming necessarily solves that, even if he comes with, hey, this is what they like to do. And he may not even know everything that they are trying to do based on who's starting at quarterback next year for Ohio State either. So that's kind of a big mystery for him as well. But does it stink he kind of goes to a Big Ten rival? Yeah, but here's the thing, Nick. I think we'd both agree, and this is not a knock on Julian Fleming. He seems like he's a good dude. He obviously has been a leader on with this program for the last couple of years. Even when they had Chris Olave and Jackson Smith and Jigba and all those guys, they all raved about how great Julian Fleming was and how just a great teammate and leader that he was for the group. But I don't know that he has lived up to the expectations of him coming out of high school as one of the, let's face it, he was one of the highest rated recruits to ever come to Ohio State. I'm pulling it up here real quick. He was the 7th highest recruit to ever come to Ohio State. So he had some key drops at certain moments. He just never really sort of materialized when you saw all these other receivers who were kind of around him. So I'm not sitting here shaking in my boots oh no, Julian Fleming's going to Penn State. That means Ohio State's in trouble next year. I'd be more worried if Jeremiah Smith was not committed to Ohio State than I am about Julian Fleming going to Penn State.
Is it bad that I kind of root for the kid? Because all the things you mentioned, by the end, when he'd drop a pass, and I can't remember if it was a Penn State game or the Rutgers, there was one of those games towards the end of the season where it was kind of a moment for him, and he had kind of a drop. And I just, at the end, one of the downsides of college football fandom is that we are hyper-focused on guys we have sky-high expectations for. And Julian Fleming was one of those dudes, and I just felt bad for him by the end of it because he just seemed like a good kid that just got lost in the shuffle, which is what happens. It's funny, they had Emeka Ibuka and Marvin Harrison Jr. It's not Julian Fleming's fault, per se, that he got lost. And before that, it was Jackson Smith and Jigba, and it was all these other dudes. So, I'm hopeful that he gets a new start and a fresh start. And listen, I don't think he's going to be the difference maker in next year's Penn State-Ohio State game. And obviously we've got that going on. We've got Kyle McCord, who apparently at the last second said hell no to Matt Rule and Nebraska, which seemed like I mentioned to you the stylistic fit that I had concerns about with how Matt Rule likes to play offense and what Kyle McCord's good at. Well, then it turns out Dylan Raiola, who is the nephew of Donovan Raiola, longtime Lions starting center, that he flipped from Georgia back to Nebraska. So now they've got their quarterback, and then Kyle McCord lands in Syracuse. And I got to be honest with you, don't love it for Kyle McCord. New head coach, defensive head coach, first-time head coach at any level, and he's from the defensive side of the ball. I know that Fran Brown has gotten a lot of love for the staff that he's kind of put in there, but you don't have any track record on the offensive side of the ball that you can kind of point to. And so to me, it's a Hail Mary. And it feels like, well, this is the best I could get, which surprises the hell out of me that that's the best Kyle McCord could get, Spencer.
First of all, I was just going to say, I don't think there's an issue with rooting for Julian Fleming. I agree with you. I think he just kind of got lost in the shuffle here. There was so much wide receiver talent coming in. It's not fully his fault. There were some moments. He actually had a couple good catches in that Michigan game too that I thought were like big time for him. So yeah, it's unfortunate that it didn't really materialize to the level we thought it would for him. But I certainly am right there with you in watching him next year against Penn State and seeing any Penn State games. Like I'll be certainly supporting him. But yeah, with the Kyle McCord thing, it is interesting that Syracuse ends up being sort of the best option for him. We talked about like, oh, maybe Pitt would be an option, and there'd be some other schools. Syracuse seems like it's a little lower on the totem pole for schools that he would end up at. And yeah, you bring up the new head coach there being a defensive minded guy. I don't know if they're bringing him in hoping, okay, he'll sort of stabilize the offense for us while I focus on rebuilding the defense here. But I don't know if I think he can still be okay. And I think he can still, if his goal is I'm going to go here and get some NIL money, maybe increase my draft stock or whatever. I'm not going to sit here and say Syracuse increases your profile, because I think Ohio State, being the starting quarterback at Ohio State, is obviously a bigger deal than being the starting quarterback at Syracuse. But do you think this has the potential to like backfire on Kyle McCord? Or because I think there's certain programs he could have gone to where it really would have worked out. Like he would have had the right system, had the right coach, could have done some nice things, almost ended up like maybe a Kenny Pickett type player where you're like, oh, this guy coming out of college, like he's got some potential. Let's see what we can do with him. And then even if he doesn't pan out the NFL, maybe he goes in a round that you wouldn't have necessarily expected and he makes something out of it. But do you think that him going to Syracuse now is going to maybe hurt the potential of him to increase his profile in that way?
Yeah, I mean, listen, I hope it works out for the kid because, again, I got nothing against him. All right, he wasn't what they needed this year, but I guess I don't like how the process played out. And when you're choosing between Nebraska and Syracuse, and all due respect to both those schools, Matt Rule's a really good man. He really is, like a really good college football coach, and he seems to embrace the NIL era, which is awesome. Like that's adaptation, and I think Fran Brown has gotten a lot of great marks for being the hire there at Syracuse. I guess my thing is, tell me why it's better than Ohio State. And it's funny, like when we first saw the news, our reaction was, well, maybe Ryan Day went to him, whispered in his ear and said, you're not going to be here next year, so why don't you go out in the portal and make some money? As this thing has evolved, it sure seems like Ohio State was surprised. And actually, Bill Kurlick, who was on our last episode, mentioned that Ohio State was surprised that Kyle McCord went into the portal.
Yeah.
And so, there are also whispers about a family member being in his ear and maybe saying, hey, my family member needs to be the starting quarterback next year, guaranteed.
Right. So real quick, I just want to add like some of the things that I've just heard. And again, I'm not trying to pretend, I'm not trying to pose as a Ohio State reporter. I'm not like in the building every day to know, but just things that I've heard from people I've talked to. It sounds like, it was more so we kind of talked about it, Nick. It sounds like it was kind of I'm going to break up with you before you break up with me type thing. Like he kind of got wind that Ohio State might be looking elsewhere. He said, if you can guarantee me the starting job and you can maybe get me some more NIL money, I'd be willing to stay. And Ohio State was kind of like, we're not, we're going to explore our options. And then that's where he leaves. So I can understand why maybe it caught him off guard, but I also think like they had to expect it on some level that it could happen because Kyle McCord listen, the stats are the stats. That's going to help boost his case for why he deserves more NIL money. So I'm sure on some level, like he looked and said, I can go somewhere else and get paid based off of what I did at Ohio State. And if that's what's a priority to him, then fine. I think like
actually no, that not fine because you're going to get paid a pittance. Like the difference between what he could get paid at Ohio State and what he probably got paid at Syracuse. So it's all speculation at this point. It's none of it's firm and on top of the radar. So like, but one, you can't tell me that Syracuse is going to pay you more than Ohio State would. And two, the whole point of him going in the portal is I want to go to a place where I know I'm going to start so I can become an NFL quarterback. When was the last time Donovan McNabb, 23 years ago, was the last legitimate starting quarterback?
Well,
Tommy DeVito.
I was going to say, don't be sleeping on Tommy DeVito over here.
You talking to me? You talking to me? Sorry, I went full De Niro.
He might have somebody listening to the podcast, and
he
might come whack us if we don't show some respect. So
I do not want to get whacked. No, sir. I'm not in high school. I got to tell you though, man, like it bugs me. It bugs me because if your idea is, well, I can get $200,000 more NIL here. Okay, well, where's a better program that's going to put you in the NFL? Yeah. And, I got to be honest with you. Coaches annoy me when they say, man, kids don't want to compete anymore. It sure seems like either Kyle McCord didn't want to compete or somebody in his family or people around him didn't think he should compete. And I think next year, like if Kyle McCord comes back, I don't think they're starting Aaron Nolan in his freshman year. So even if Ayer's in the competition, I don't think he's a serious, competitor. And so you already beat Devin Brown out once. Like Lincoln Keenholz shouldn't scare you that much. Like I think this is a real miscalculation for Kyle, and I hope I'm wrong. I hope he goes to Syracuse and secures the bag, and then next year he's a first, second round pick in the NFL. I don't think it's going to happen though. Not the way it could happen at Ohio State, where you're playing around other top 10 picks at almost every spot of the ball. And you're going to have, potentially Smith next year, as long as he signs this week. You're going to have Carnell Tate. You're going to have all these guys that can help you get where you want to go. So if he had landed in Oregon, where Dante Moore landed, if he had landed at USC, where Malachi Nelson just hit the transfer portal, or if he had gone to Oklahoma, these are all places that even though they don't have a track record like Ohio State does with putting Justin Fields, Dwayne Haskins, CJ Stroud, all first-round picks into the NFL under Ryan Day, but at least they're premier programs that have premier talent around you that make you better. Instead, you're not going to Syracuse where it's year one of a rebuild, and you got to be the best player on that team. Good luck, man. I feel bad for the kid. I think this was either an ego of his move, or
would you feel this way if you went to Nebraska? Like if he ended up in Nebraska, would you feel better about it?
Not really. Marcus Satterfield has not. I mean, Marcus Satterfield's the OC there.
Yeah.
Talk to a South Carolina fan how they felt about Marcus Satterfield. And again, I thought stylistically the fit just didn't make sense. So
yeah,
I just feel bad for the kid. I feel like he got caught up in the game. And it's on him. You know what I mean? Like, that's the thing. Like, in the end, it's on, if you really want to be an NFL quarterback, how is Syracuse better for that than Ohio State?
Yeah, and again, I don't know what his priorities are. I bring up the money thing. We don't know the full details of any NIL deals. There was the one that was reported with Nebraska when he was rumored to be reporting there. That was like 600,000 or whatever the hell it was, to be the spokesperson for Honda McCord. But yeah, like, I don't know, like maybe he is driven by the money and he's like, maybe I'm not going to be as good of an NFL prospect, so I got to get my money now. Like, I don't know what's driving him, but I will say this, because you bring up guys not wanting to compete. I think it's even less about him not necessarily wanting to compete, because he stepped into a competition this year and he won it. It might just be flat out, Nick, like he just wants to be wanted. Because you hear about like the modern day athlete, and I don't mean this as a knock to the modern day athlete. I think it's more about coaches need to evolve the way that they think. Like we talk about Dabo Swinney being very archaic in the way he approaches things. Like, oh, I don't want the transfer portal. I'm not gonna baby a guy. I don't want these guys getting paid. All this different stuff. I think it's more about like the modern day athlete is the modern day athlete. You have to adjust to them. They're not going to adjust or bend to you. And so I just wonder, like, in all that talk about those things and how athletes respond to certain things today, I just almost wonder if the mindset for some of these guys, maybe this is Kyle McCord, is, hey, I want to be where I'm wanted. And if I'm not wanted at Ohio State after I put up the numbers that I put up and I did what I did and I came within a couple plays from potentially knocking off Michigan, then I don't want to be here. And the money would obviously help. And so I'm going to go somewhere where I feel like I'm wanted. I do wonder how much that maybe plays into it as well.
So with that, the other quarterback carousel, or the rest of the quarterback carousel, continues to spin. Dante Moore lands at Oregon, as I mentioned. Dylan Gabriel also ending up out west as well, transferring out of Oklahoma. Malachi Nelson of USC is back in the portal. So it's interesting that the Buckeyes still do not have, at least seemingly, a path to a quarterback here, as there's a lot of guys who've been in the portal for a hot minute that they have either showed little interest or just have not pulled the trigger on, including Cam Ward. I think they're in a really interesting situation, and I think fans are going to start to get really uncomfortable as more of these guys go off the board, as it starts to look like they're just going to commit to the plan that they have.
Yeah, and I think the one thing working in their favor maybe is that this is kind of there's a closed period right now that started on Monday. So from the 18th of December till the 11th of January, basically through the national championship game, the visits for recruits and different things, you're not allowed to do campus visits, official visits, or off-campus contact. There's only really phone calls kind of going on. So I actually feel like Ohio State, my view on it is this: they're going into this bowl game, the Cotton Bowl with Missouri, as a chance to basically audition both Devin Brown and Keenholz and see kind of what they have here. And then once that window kind of opens back up in the new year, they'll have a chance to maybe host some of these guys. Because I don't know that, like, Malachi, what the hell? I don't know that Malachi Nelson, is going to make a decision here like instantly. Like, I'm sure he's going to kind of see what's out there. And I would guess, like, I don't know that Ohio State's interested in him, but if that's somebody they might pursue, maybe that's something they do after they kind of see how the bowl game goes, which is coming up here. It's only like 10 days away. So I don't know that they're necessarily in. I don't know that. My point is, I don't know that there needs to be panic yet, but I do think, yes, it's going to make Buckeye fans a little unnerving to know they don't have that guy just yet picked out. Now, I have a question in relation to Dante Moore, because you said you mentioned he made his decision this week. I wonder, like, how much do you think the Buckeyes are looking at the options out there? And this could be in play, too, for a guy when you're looking at Malachi Nelson, because he's a younger guy. You're expecting he's probably going to start a couple years for you. How much do you think that is holding back the Buckeyes from pursuing some of these guys if they're thinking long-term, like, well, we want to make sure we're paving the way for our recruits coming in rather than get this guy now? And should they be thinking that way? Because on some level, like, they kind of got to just think about, like, we got to do what's best for us to win right now. I mean, Ryan Day, every year he loses to Michigan, his seat gets a little bit hotter. So I understand he's clearly, I don't think, getting fired going into next year. But do you think it's okay for them to think that way? Or should they maybe pursue some of these guys, whether or not it's going to impact what happens with, say, an Aaron Nolan?
I think if there was a guy that they thought could step in and be what Justin Fields was for you, which is an immediate impact guy, and obviously Justin had to sit the year out because of the old college football rules, but I feel like if they had their Justin Fields, I think they'd pull the trigger. And I think in lieu of that, I think they are doing the smart thing. Like, the goal is to have a sustainable ecosystem of quarterbacks where it becomes next man up, where you can go from JT Barrett and say, all right, now it's either Joe Burrow or Dwayne Haskins, right? Or Dwayne Haskins. And then you can go, all right, it's either player X or Justin Fields. And then it's either CJ Stroud or this player. So I think that should be the goal. And it just so happens that in between CJ Stroud and Aaron Nolan, you have a 2-year gap. So I think it would make sense, unless you have a guy that you think is worth losing Aaron Nolan, I think it makes sense to try and, look at short-term options to try and maintain this ecosystem of next man up at the quarterback position, because I think that's only going to help you. Like I think it's more value to you developing a guy that is sat on your roster for a year or 2 or 3 years and him going into the NFL draft than you were like the guy that was the conduit for that guy in his final year of college. Do you agree or disagree with that?
I think that's probably a fair way to look at it. And just kind of keeping the ecosystem going, and that's part of the reason why the Buckeyes are in the dilemma they're in right now, right? Because their succession plan to CJ Stroud was supposed to be Quinn Ewers, and Quinn Ewers transfers, goes to Texas, and now that's why you have this kind of gap/window that's throwing things off for you, where you had to start Kyle McCord this year, and you're kind of out there surveying what's available to you at the quarterback position. But I also just think too, like, I understand that thought process, and I understand you got to kind of think ahead of, okay, where are we going to be in a year and 2 years, whatever. And I'm not some recruiting master, but I also think about it from the perspective of this organization top down with Ryan Day. They don't have time to sit necessarily and like wait and see, like, okay, well, we'll find a way to get to Aaron Nolan, and then we'll run with Aaron Nolan. Like, no, like, you got to win this year. So I agree with you. Like, I'm not saying make any rash decisions and just bring in Cam Ward because you think he's going to, like, quiet the masses out there with the torch and pitchforks. It has to be a fit. And it sounds like maybe they thought Riley Leonard was a fit and they pursued him a little bit. But, like, yes, it has to be a fit for sure. But I just don't know that they have like the time, I guess is the word, to sit there and just be like, well, it's okay. We'll let Dante Moore go elsewhere. We'll let Malachi Nelson go elsewhere because we got Aaron Nolan next year, and we'll just figure it out this year. And I don't know, maybe they feel really good about Devin Brown. Some of the stuff that I've heard is just that, yeah, they seem like they're going to sort of roll with what they have in the room already. And if that's what they're going to do, then I guess we're going to see how that works out. And you mentioned, the locker room has really come to Devin Brown's defense and said, we believe in him, and he's got a little bit more mobility to him than McCord did. So listen, maybe that's the plan and maybe it'll work out. But I just don't know that, especially with the new AD coming in, that you just want to sit back and kind of be like, well, we're okay because we got Aaron Nolan next year. Like, you do need an option this year, whether that's a young guy that might push a couple recruits away, or whether or not because that's what you bring up Justin Fields. Like, even Justin Fields started 2 years. So that could have disrupted some of the recruiting process for Ohio State, but it didn't. Like, he came, he played 2 years, and then that bridged the gap to CJ Stroud. I'm not worried about Ohio State finding the next big quarterback recruit. Like, they're always going to be on the radar for guys, and they're always going to be bringing these guys in. So even if it were to cost you, I guess, Aaron Nolan, okay, well, you'll get the next guy that comes out.
There's something to be said about not panicking in the wake of the Michigan loss. So while I would love that quarterback in the portal, and I certainly have been hot and heavy off every name, KJ Jefferson, Cam Ward, it's the Baskin and Phelps. Do we want them? But if Ryan Day is looking at this and says, there's some things I need to change, but I can't panic at the quarterback position. I need to trust what I've done for the last 5 years here. There's actually some really smart logic to that. Right? It's good to change. It really is. If he thinks about why he hasn't beaten Michigan, I think, and finds ways to change or adapt off that, that's good. But he shouldn't just go get a quarterback because, well, Kyle McCord lost, and then Kyle McCord didn't feel loved, and now we got to go ahead and change the whole plan and maybe endanger this 3-year plan we had at quarterback. So that would be the devil's advocate to what I think you just said.
I get it, and I'm not saying they need to panic either. But I'm just saying, like, the thought process going back the other direction to respond to what you just said would be, well, okay, you got to trust the process of the last 5 years. Well, the last 5 years, you've lost to Michigan 3 straight. You didn't play them the 1 year. You lost to them the last 3 years. So what is the process that you're trusting actually gotten you? So maybe you do need to change things up. That would be, I guess, like
what it's gotten you is like 47 wins or something like that. People act as if this is Michigan, before Jim Harbaugh or when Rich Rod was there. Like, guys, it sucked. I'm not I'm not here to I'm not here to polish that turd. It has sucked losing to Michigan in 3 straight years. It sucks not being in the playoffs this year. But like, look at where it's gotten you. Yes, these 47 wins, damn it. And I understand there's some valid arguments.
And this isn't even me.
The Big Ten.
This isn't even me necessarily, but I'm saying like there's a lot of Ohio State fans out there who are sitting there saying we could bring in a lot of coaches who could do what Ryan Day has done, which is win all these games in the Big Ten. Win all these games in the Big Ten and then lose to Michigan.
Yeah, and that's fan hubris. And respect. And listen, Buckeye fans, I love you. I do. You're crazy, and I love being a Buckeye fan because it's conversation.
I'm standing up for the common fan. Let's go.
Yeah. By the way, there's Common Man in Columbus. Now it's Common Fan here in Cleveland. I just at some point, I get it. Yes. Almost anybody can beat Illinois. Almost anybody can beat Purdue. But to throw this away, well, anyone could do this. No, not anyone could. Okay? There's a reason why James Franklin has been third tier in the Big Ten. There's a reason why it took Jim Harbaugh 4 or 5 years to break through that impenetrable seal that Ohio State had for it. And yes, it's happened. And yes, there's reasons to look at this thing and say, how do we make it better? But this woe is me, the sky is falling, we're never going to win again. That is just fan overreaction. And it is not something Ryan Day should consider himself with. He's got to focus on how to tweak the program, not overhaul it completely, not wholesale changes, not throw literally everything out the window. It is tweak the program. Because if you tweak too much, you might go the opposite way, which is going to get you fired. Losing 4 games, including to Michigan next year, is going to get you fired just as much as if you only lose to Michigan next year. Oh, it felt good. It's been building up for a minute here. Now we have not gotten to the high school recruiting side of things as the early signing period opens up tomorrow and runs through Friday of this week. So we're going to get to that when we come back. But first, a word from our sponsors. All right, guys, we are back. Nick and Spencer here. And as we have mentioned all show long, we've talked a lot about the portal, Spencer. But starting tomorrow, high school recruits can sign. It's the early signing deadline. And it's funny because Ohio State fans have very, very strongly reacted to the second Ohio State high school recruit flipping to Miami in this cycle. This one being Jordan Lyle, a running back out of St. Aquinas in Florida. And it's funny, if there are 2 guys in this class that flipping would make me really concerned about the state of the program, and neither of those guys is Jordan Lyle. You hate to lose out on that guy, but I feel like this is just the reality of early signing day. And I think Bill Kurlick put it perfectly last week. There are just some dudes who they'll hold firm on a commit, and at the last second switch. They wanted to switch earlier. They just wanted to kind of duck out of the BS.
Yeah, he definitely said it very very poetic, not poetically, but he did it justice in terms of how that. Yeah, that's a good word for it. That's a good word for it. Yeah, he did a good job sort of summing up the thought process here and why this happens. And listen, Bill being somebody who's covered Ohio State recruiting for as long as he has, I know you and Dustin were talking about it on Monday. 25 years, he was there when Dustin was still at Ohio State, so that tells you he's certainly been around this program. He knows kind of how it works. He knows how the process sort of flows. And so, yeah, I trust him in terms of giving some good insight into why guys flip when they do, or, what the decision-making process kind of looks like. And, yeah, I agree with you. You mentioned the 2 guys you'd be most worried about. For me, they're Jeremiah Smith and Edric Houston, because we've been talking about trying to get an edge rusher in here that is a true difference maker, which the Buckeyes have seemed to be lacking in recent recruiting classes and in recent years. And obviously we know Jeremiah Smith being the top receiver in the country, keep that sort of Ohio State's kind of gone from being cornerback U or DB U to now wide receiver you, where all their wide receivers end up being these amazing NFL talents. So to get another guy in here like that is obviously impressive. There's people saying that he's coming in better than what Marvin Harrison came in as a freshman, as what people are saying. So like, yeah, there would be reason to be concerned, I think, if he flipped, which it does based on his visit to FSU. We haven't heard anything leading up to Wednesday's signing day that indicates he is going to flip. And yeah, as long as you're getting those two guys kind of sticking together, and of course Aaron Noland, who we've talked a lot about, I think those are the guys that I'm most that you mostly want to get to Wednesday and make sure they're still on board.
So real quick here, I think it's an interesting note where Ohio State fans are. In previous years, when a 4-star running back, wide receiver, defensive end, when they flipped, even when Dylan Raiola flipped out of Ohio State, like the reaction has been, well, it's just a high school recruit. And I think it's funny because like I look at the transfer portal immediately as this guy can come in and help day one. But most of these dudes are about 2 years from now, 3 years from now than they are day one. And sometimes that changes. Sometimes you have a transitional year. But it's been interesting to see in this cycle. Like the Buckeyes still have 2 other running backs committed. And one's more of like a gadget player and one's like a true running back. But like
James Peoples is a better overall recruit than Lyle is. And he's still committed to Ohio State. Like
you also have Dallas Hayden, who I think is going to be a stud next year. There's still whispers, although I don't know if I believe it, that Travion could come back. And the reason why that matters is like he's a good 4-star recruit. And I think people are looking at Ohio State, and anything that can be perceived as negative is now taken as negative. It's like, guys, if Jeremiah Smith ends up at Florida State, you have permission to panic. If Aaron Noland, who seems airtight on his commitment,
no pun intended.
Pun intended.
Actually, pun intended.
I'm that guy, okay, as the kids say. But no, I mean, if Aaron Noland flips to Oklahoma or if he flips to USC, let's panic. You mentioned the edge rusher. Like, okay, if that guy flips, that's going to be a real concern. Outside of that, it's not that these guys don't matter, because the reality is it is oil speculating in 1911. You're hoping to strike gold 7 or 8 times out of any given class, and everybody else can just be roster fodder. But like, it's a guess. Mm-hmm. So okay, well, you lost your third running back. Go find a third one. Because the funny thing is, running back's another position where you're just never going to have problems at Ohio State with the lineage of Ezekiel and Eddie George and the litany of dudes you put in the NFL. It's quarterback, running back, wide receivers. I don't worry about that unless it is the literal number 1 recruit in all of college football, like Jeremiah Smith. And I think, it's funny, man. Like
I'll say this too real quick as you bring up Ezekiel Elliott. Like Ezekiel Elliott coming out of high school was also like a 4-star recruit. He wasn't even a 5-star guy. So yeah, like it stinks, but I think Ohio State, to your point, has a habit of turning guys that maybe aren't the top guy into something, producing that type of player. I think it's more important about like O-line recruiting and the receiver recruiting, because this offense is trying to do some other things than just run the football. But yeah, I don't know that I'm as worried about that as maybe some other fans might be. You gotta unmute yourself.
I am now unmuted. I do think Jeremiah Smith is going to be a huge part of what they do next year. And I think that is, when we start to get here, like it's puckering time. You mentioned, well, we don't know. There's just a lot of speculation. And anytime a guy this late into the process is still taking any measure of visits, and he has consistently taken visits to Florida State, right? So anytime a guy does that, that's one of the biggest signs that he just might not be ready to say it out loud, because he doesn't want to get flack from the mass hysteria. And it's not Buckeye fans specifically. It's every superfan program. It's Clemson. It's Florida State. It's Ohio State. It's USC. I mean, if you're a blue blood, you're going to go absolutely crazy if a guy decommits to you at the last moment. It's just the reality. That's how people act. So
Yeah.
I do understand. Um, I do understand that that might be part of the reasoning there. So there's
Oh,
circumstantial signs, but he still says he's committed. That's you got
yeah.
to take these kids at their word till otherwise.
I also think too, Nick. I hate to make it this simple or simplify it down to this one thing, but you mentioned like the attitude used to be, oh well, it's just a high school recruit. It's not a big deal. And I do think on some level that'll come into play more this year and in future years when the transfer portal becomes even more of a thing. Because yeah, you miss out on a high school recruit. Well, there's always the portal. You could get a guy. Okay, great. But I also think that that mentality also stems from one thing, and one thing only, and that's beating Michigan. In the years where you're beating, when you're beating up on Michigan and everything's good, and you win 8 straight or whatever the hell, however many in a row they won, like it does. You don't care about X, Y, Z high school recruits saying, "Well, we're actually going to flip our commitments and go elsewhere," because you're like, "Oh, well, life is good. We're the cream of the crop. We're in the playoff conversation every year." But when you lose to Michigan, yes, that 4-star recruit who is further down the list in terms of guys that are you're bringing in, but still a guy that was you were counting on being there. It's on some in some capacity. That start it's oh no, the sky's falling, everything's coming apart at Ohio State. Ryan Day's lost a step with the recruiting. They're looking for reasons to fire Ryan Day, so I think that just adds fuel to the fire. In a year where you again lost to that team, again, I don't mean to simplify it down to one thing specifically, but I do think that especially for the fan base in particular, and a lot of what we're talking about is fan base driven when it comes to these recruits. It gets
real quick,
boiled down to that.
do you want to throw up the screen grab just for people who don't understand the kind of background here? Because again, we've been talking about this week. Wednesday, December 20th, is the beginning of the early signing period. Friday is the closure of that time. That's where commits can sign here. But Coach J.R. Sandlin did a great job at this on social media, throwing this out as just a reminder here. And while I just want to have this in the background for a minute, it's important to remember when we're talking about this, even after losing Jordan Lyle there, Spencer, they're still number 2 in the country signing class.
Yeah.
So they're going to be okay. As long as those 3 players we mentioned, they're going to be okay. But this is kind of good background stuff to pay attention to as we go into the rest of this week and the dead period has begun.
And this
Confusing.
is what I referred to it a little bit earlier too, just to have there's this window where you can't really have as much contact. And so that's why I said, even if Ohio State doesn't walk away, we said specific to the quarterback position, but even if they don't walk away with a quarterback in the portal yet, it's not the end of the world, because some of these guys, it sounds like, Malik Murphy, excuse me. I combined I combined Malachi Nelson and Malik Murphy. I don't know what it is with my names today, but there's a couple guys that are still out there that haven't made a set decision yet, and they might be waiting for bowl season to kind of formulate and come to an end before they do that. And I do think for Ohio State, that's fine, because like I said, I think they're probably going to do some sort of, let's see what Devin Brown looks like in this bowl game to sort of determine where they're at on the other side of it, and if they do need to pursue a quarterback.
All right, guys. So we will have more on the early signing day period later on this week on the second edition of Sons of the Shoe this week, which again, you can catch everywhere you get your podcast. Please make sure to follow Apple, Spotify, the free Odyssey app, and more. But when we come back, one college football coach has a plan to fix college football. Our white knight has arrived, but first, a word from our sponsors. We've got to get to Chip Kelly's plan to save college football in a moment, Spencer. But before we get there, of course, it's time for the Michigan Panic Meter, that time of the show where we examine our innermost feelings and relate them to the biggest conflict that Ohio State faces every single year. I will stay in the light scarlet, as they have not landed a quarterback that scares me, nor has Ohio State landed a quarterback that wows me. So, as I've mentioned, between that and Jeremiah Smith flipping or Aaron Nolan flipping, Those are the only things that can truly get me to panic more, or reduce panic in the event of a 5-star quarterback coming your way here.
Well, in classic me fashion, I ride the wave with the fans a little bit more than I think you do, Nick. Sometimes, so I'm actually going to move mine. I'm not moving it crazy. I'm not moving all the way to to gray or anything like that. I'm just moving into the white. I'm going to move it to the white. I think seeing Dante Moore announce that he was going to Oregon and not Michigan, that made me feel a little bit better. Also, I don't, for any listeners out there who regularly listen to 92.3 The Fan. Ken Carman said that he had a dream that Michigan lost to Alabama in the college football playoff. And generally, Ken Carman's dreams are some sort of intuition into what's going to happen. He shared that he's had other dreams that have led to things that actually played out. So,
all right,
I'm basing this on, yes, this is a very flimsy argument, I know, but I'm going to the white.
One, I would expect nothing less of the common fan, Spencer German. This is, you follow the whims of the fans. I get it. Two, you don't get to say, hey, I've had these visions. You just got to trust me. Unless you've gone on the record, Nostradamus didn't wake up 35 quatrains in and be like, look at these things I predicted before. Now heed my word on the Germans in, World War II. No, he didn't do that. He had the first 35 quatrains and then talked about Hitler or Hister or whatever the hell it was. So I'm calling shenanigans on Ken Carman. He's a good man, very thorough. He's a gentleman. He's a good dad. And I like to say nice things about somebody before I attack them. But I'm calling absolute and utter bullshit on, I had a dream that Alabama beat Michigan when you're not a fan of any of the schools. What are we doing here? I had a dream that UTEP beat UNLV next year, and I have a very strong feeling that you should put them on plus 250 for UTEP. No. Sounds
like a game that Lima might be calling too. UTEP versus UNLV.
Start etching that shit into stone, or get off my lawn. If you want to play prophet, that's fine. All right, there's a lot of false prophets in these times. I'm saying be a real prophet. I'm saying start etching it out like Nostradamus, or get the fuck off my lawn. That's where I am. I'm sorry, Ken. Somebody has to stand up to you.
Well, I trust Ken. Like me, Ken is a man of the common fan. So I trust Ken. I
feel like that's the name of the show when Lima finally gets fired. It's Common Fans with Ken and Spencer. And it's just take turns who can pander more to the other person.
Hey, all I'll say about that is I'll take a morning drive slot if it's available. I'm not going to complain about that.
Hey, whose ass do I got to kiss? I think we just found out. I think we just, that's called, by the way, I think you're more of a prophet than he is, because what you're doing right now is you're laying the tracks. You're laying in wait here, just I got to buy into what Ken's saying. And because Ken's got a scoreboard up here of imaginary takes that he had or dreams that he had that signal the future. And one day, and then he's also got another one of nice things that people have said.
I mean, maybe I am Nostradamus. I did nail my Brown score prediction over the weekend, so there you go.
You were off by a point.
I said 2017. Go roll the tape. Roll the tape. Go back. Hey, this is a good plug to go back into the Odyssey app. And while you're looking for Sons of the Shoe so that you can follow us, you can also go back to Sunday and use the rewind function because it's still within 72 hours. And you can go back and hear me give my take around 11:52 a.m. on 92.3 The Fan.
All right, so what do you feel about these bowl games this week if we're going to keep these predictions going? I'm getting a strong sense that in the Idaho Potato Bowl.
I'll make some predictions on Thursday for you. How about that?
Yeah, I'm ready for it. All right. So UCLA head coach Chip Kelly laid out his plan to save college football this week.
Is the biggest issue that you might have right now, whether it be realignment, NIL, transfer portal, and what would your plan maybe be to try to solve it?
I think they're all a problem, and I think we need to have a conference commissioner. I think football should be separate from the other sports. Just the fact that our school is leaving to go to the Big Ten in football, our softball team should be playing Arizona in softball. Our basketball team should be playing Arizona in basketball. But because football left, and they're saying, well, how do you do that? Well, Notre Dame's independent in football, and they're in a conference and everything else. I think we should all be independent in football. And you can have a 64-team conference that's in the Power 5, and you can have a 64-team conference in the Group of 5. And we separate it, and we play each other. You can have the West Coast teams, and then every year we play 7 games against the West Coast teams, and then we play the East. So we play Syracuse, Boston College, Pitt, West Virginia, Virginia. Then the next year you play against the South while you still play your 7 teams. You can play a 7-game schedule. You can play 4 against another conference, another division opponent, and you can always play against one Mountain West team every year so that we can still keep those rivalries going. Not that I've really thought about this. Not that I've a lot of spent of time on this. But I think if you went together collectively as a group and said there's 132 teams and we all share in the same we all share the same TV contract, so that the Mountain West doesn't have one and the Sun Belt doesn't have another and SEC has one and they have another, that we all go together, that's a lot of games, and there's a lot of people in the TV world that would go through it. You can sponsor each one. Instead of calling it Group of 5 and Power 5, you can call it Amazon, Nike, bid that out to things. You can do a lot of different things. But I think if we still do the same thing and take all that money, and I would do this, and I think this needs to be done, that money now needs to be shared with the student athletes, and there needs to be revenue sharing, and the players should get paid, and you can get rid of NLI, and the schools should be paying the players because the players are what the product is. And the fact that they don't get paid is really the biggest travesty. Not that I've thought about it.
All right. So what I'm about to say, Spencer, is more the reaction to his plan than it is the reaction to Chip's plan, because I think there's a lot of good in there. And I think there's a lot of common sense in there. And that is what I think has been lacking from the NCAA. And even now that these schools have more power, there's still too much common sense lacking, given that there's this much money involved. But to the people who say he fixed college football, no, he just had a salient plan. Like, I think that's what, like, because nobody is saying anything about how you fix college football or college basketball or any of the other sports, it then becomes, if anybody has any plan, it's like, man, he fixed it. Look how easy that was. Well, I'm not going that far, but there were some good ideas in there. What say you?
Well, first of all, I was going to say it's funny because, like, if you or me say that, to come up with a plan like that on the air, which, by the way, there's been plenty of people on the air, or whether it's a radio host or journalists writing, like, in columns what they think should change. This has been the conversation, right? Oh, let's just make our own league. Let's just split into 2 divisions. Let's all share the money. Like, that's literally been written about, talked about, whatever. It just hasn't necessarily been said out loud by a coach to this point. So all of a sudden, shit, like, if you or I say that on the air, they're like, well, this dope. He doesn't know anything about college football. But when
they just ignore it.
When
they don't pay any mind to it.
But when Chip Kelly says it, it's, oh my God, this guy saved college football. Where has this mindset been this entire time? Well, if you listen to some of these other people, you would have already heard this. But I think maybe I don't disagree with anything he said. And I think that, like, a lot of what he said is obviously sound and probably the way that it should be. And it sounds like the NCAA now with new leadership is transitioning to maybe thinking more like this, which is good. The only dilemma that I think in his plan that he throws out there is the paying players from money raised by the football program, because as we know, it's not that simple. The reason NIL, I think, actually works and is a good thing for college football is because it allows the schools to not have to feel like they have to pay the players from the pot that comes in. Because as we know, Nick, and having worked in college athletics myself, like, the people, like, everybody thinks that, like, these athletic departments just run themselves. They're like, oh yeah, it's okay. The football can break off and do their own thing and have their own pot, and it won't even matter. But, like, guys, the schools that have big D1 football programs, that money often funds than the women's volleyball program and the cross country program, because those sports don't generate as much revenue, if any revenue. Like, there's a lot of sports that end up in the red at the end of their seasons, and it takes the football sort of the money from football sort of supplementing that. And some schools only have basketball, so they use the basketball money to supplement it. But that money is important to other student athletes on campus. So that's the one flaw that I find in the plan. But I don't think anything that he said is that profound, because I've heard it before.
So I love the idea of a college football czar, but it's not going to be any more than the NFL commissioner. Like, Roger Goodell is cloaked in a lot of power. He still has 32 bosses to answer to. So even that's not flawless. And I guess the one thing that I think is just totally pie in the sky, will never happen, is the idea of, well, we should pool all of our money together. And it's just never going to happen. Now, that not as currently constructed. It might end up happening that way when the SEC and the Big Ten are the two conferences that are left in the Power Five, if that ends up coming to fruition 10 years from now. But like this idea that the Big Ten and the SEC, who take great pride in their dominance, both fiscally and on the football field or the basketball court or whatever, the idea that those schools are willingly going to say, well, for the good of college football, no, this is kill or be killed. This is, you've got to survive and you've got to do what you think so you can be last man standing. So I think that to me is where it becomes pie in the sky. But like, I'll be honest with you. I think the thing that should really happen is, I do think the group of five should solidify into one one national brand. And the reason being is, I think they're missing out on a lot of money where they could take some of these inferior bowls and have a 64 team playoff where everybody gets a chance, everybody's invited. And I think you could have an NCAA tournament for the group of five schools. I think that's where there's money left on the table. Now, again, ESPN owns the bowls, so maybe you have to establish your own TV contract for your own purposes. But like, that's something that's interesting. But the idea that Ohio State and Michigan and in Penn State and Notre Dame and Alabama and Georgia, these schools are going to be like, listen, I really feel for Cal and SMU and, oh, buddy, I just BYU, we love you. No, they're not going to do that. So, I mean, I guess my point is, like, that to me is where I think there's still, when a coach brings it up, I think there's still a lot of fanatical thinking here. And it's funny to me that a coach wants to get rid of NIL so they can just pay the players, when we all kind of look at NIL and say, well, isn't that just paying the players? So he just wants to change the labeling of it and change the funneling of the money, which honestly gives more control to the schools. And that is something like to me, when you have these third-party entities, these NIL collectives, I think that probably does benefit the players more than if Gene Smith or if Ward Manuel was the one pointing down from on high saying, well, you're worth 500,000. Or honestly, we're going to go ahead and pay everybody 250,000 instead of paying dudes what their fair market value is.
Yeah, that's a good way to look at it. And I think you're right about just the finances of it, which is why, like I said, I think the NIL actually makes more sense than just paying from the schools. And I don't think that teams are going to share money. My question too, Nick, is there any going back at this point? Like he brings up, oh, well, our basketball team should be playing Arizona. Like if would because the schools all have to agree. Like, would it get to a point? Do you think it could really get to a point where they're like, well, let's just break off and make football its own entity, and then everybody else is fends for themselves, and we'll reform the Pac-12? I just don't think. I think it's gone. I don't think that there's the NCAA rarely backtracks on things, and they don't usually go back to well, let's do this over again. It's kind of just we just keep moving forward. And how things evolve, unless I had the wrong read on that. But I don't know that there's a going back at this point.
I mean, I think the going back could be when college football finally separates itself from the NCAA, which again is not going to change wholesale.
But to my point earlier, can that happen? If football breaks off and does its own thing, and then they're saying we're just going to make our own pot of money over here, is that even possible? That's kind of my big picture thing, because I don't again. That money helps fund these other programs. So is it just going to become if you're a football school, you're a football school, and then all the other schools, they'll just have other I don't get how that ends up working if football just keeps all their own money.
I mean, I think financially the football program and basketball programs in some cases still fund other programs. It's just now those other programs, volleyball, hockey, baseball, those are just more geographically oriented and honestly probably going to save money. So but I think if the Power 5 schools did that with the NCAA, that might leave them a little bit more beholden. And I don't think the Power 5 schools will do anything from a football perspective to go any farther in league in bed with the NCAA. It's why Charlie Baker's plan of, well, we're going to have our own new grouping, and it's going to be of the 35 biggest schools, and it's going to be like Division One plus, which, by the way, buddy, you just described
Everything's
the FBS
plus.
and Division One. Like,
stay tuned next year. We'll have Sons of the Shoe plus.
yeah, which means we're going to add another 300-pound person to the show. So we can really just beef it up because you're a little too skinny. But no, I mean, I think like if that's 10 years too late. If that plan happens 20 years ago, I think there's some real validity to it. But now I think the only reason college football would keep the NCAA around is as a patsy, is as Oswald, as somebody to go ahead and point at and say, well, we'd love to do this, but look at these guys over here. And I just think at the end of the day, they're too smart to let their money get messed with by those dinks in Indianapolis. So I don't think it's going to happen.
That's fair. My biggest thing is just if they break from the NCAA, they can basically do whatever they want. So would the football program still be willing to I guess it boils down to more so on the school level. Would the school have still an understanding within their school that like, hey, we still need this money to fund other sports on campus, so we're still going to use it in that way? Or will the football teams, because they're breaking off and not part of the NCAA anymore, just be able to say, well, we're just going to pocket all this for ourselves? That's the one maybe thing you got to figure out. But I would imagine, I guess, these schools kind of understand how the ecosystem of college sports works, and it would still be allowed. I'm just curious, like, how that would all look. But again, I think the plan makes sense, but I don't necessarily think it's nothing. It's not anything that we haven't really heard before.
I think what's really interesting is who is the person that you could anoint as college football czar that would have the kind of clout necessary to.
Should we come up with this for the next show? Who
all
would be
right.
perfect?
So instead of speculating right now, we'll come up with our names on the Thursday, Friday show of Sons of the Shoe for our college football czar. We'll also have the latest on who's actually committed. Is Jeremiah Smith a Buckeye or is he not? Maybe if there's any breaking portal news, we'll have all that on the next edition of Sons of the Shoe podcast. Do not forget, by the way, please follow the show. We are a new podcast. Odyssey does not want us to make money. Okay, that's not real. Okay, they're really very helpful. Everybody at 2400 Sports, very helpful. But let's assume they don't want us to make money. You can help us shuck these corporate overlords. I don't know what I'm saying anymore. Follow the show wherever you get your podcasts. That includes Apple, Spotify, the Odyssey app, which is free, BT Dubs. Anywhere you get your podcast. Also, give us a follow on the 92.3 The Fan YouTube channel. Spencer, it's been delightful. Go Bucks.
Go Bucks. Let's see who's a new Buckeye come Thursday.
Woo.